So as I've worked out in the emergency room for a long time, one of the things that I like to do is talk to people about their life experiences, their affiliations, sometimes their home environment, but I like to know about what their goals and aspirations are too, and this is true of all age ranges. And I started to see that there was a commonality of a number of things, and it was a big change in our society. In my philosophical background, I really enjoy those little factors that change society and change a whole line of thinking. Believe it or not, it's usually one person. It's one person that gets the public ear, usually of the educated range, and if they're wrong, they're way wrong, and it can cause a lot of damage. I always start to ask people, what is it that you want out of life? And when I ask them that, they always give me the same lie. Since it's already up there, I'm going to tell you what the lie is. It's happiness. Okay? What if I told you that that was based on a pure lie and pure propaganda? And I'm going to make an argument to you real quick that happiness itself is a temporary emotion. Very similar to anger, very similar to jealousy. These are all temporary things that will come, they'll go, they'll ebb, they'll flow. Sometimes they're stronger and sometimes not as strong. What we look for, though, in trying to gain happiness as our ultimate life goal is trying to gain happiness every single minute of every single day. And not only is that delusional, it's pathologic, and it causes a problem. And I can tell you that what people really need and what they really want out of life is security and affirmation. If you can build your security to know that everything is going to be okay, and if you can build your affirmation to know that you're a good person in the process, I promise you, happiness comes as a byproduct. It will not come as a direct goal. Back in time, and throughout all of history, if you had mental illness, it was kind of a foregone conclusion that you were scourged by God. You had sinned for some reason, and because of that sin, your punishment was this mental illness that you had, whether it was considered a possession, whether it was considered an outcasting of society. If people had depression, if people had all those kind of things, would be skirted out of society and excluded. Because it was considered a scourge from God, you were also punished. And so they would have pestilence houses that were initially used to treat the sick and keep them away, but also used to house the criminals and the mentally ill. And in the United States especially, we would have the Eastern State Penitentiary, okay, where this was built into Philadelphia in 1820. And when people had these houses that were done for the criminals, they actually lowered the door frames and they would have archways that would go through it, and the only way you were allowed to go through was on your knees. The idea at the penitentiary states is that you were penitent. You had to get on your knees and humble yourself before God to show your restitution and to show that you were improving and getting back towards society. Afterwards, they realized we don't need to treat people this way, and we should have safe houses for mentally ill. These safe houses were called asylums, usually set up by churches, very well-meaning to take people aside. The problem is, how do you treat the mentally ill? If it's not a sin, is it a medical condition? Is it a psychological condition? Are those two the same, or are they different? They would do experimentations and they would do heavy medication. Okay? Then it would lead towards clandestine areas where people were put into a comatose or catatonic state. They would eventually get underfunded, and then they would go into complete disrepair. Now we're going to talk about Sigmund Freud. And Sigmund Freud came along and he said, you can actually psychoanalyze these people. And if you psychoanalyze them, you can actually develop a way to repair people without using necessarily heavy medication. Okay? But you can actually fix a lot of the problems that they have. But at the time, there was potions, there was tinctures, and they wanted the cure-all, they wanted the catch-all, and they finally found it. Back in Germany, at the time, they had a couple of different ways that they went with this. Every other drug, like if you took drugs like Thorazine or these kind of medications that they were using in the insane asylums, you would have downers. Opium, alcohol, all downers. So for the first time, they actually developed uppers. Uppers were the development of methamphetamines. In a different talk, I can tell you how the drug Pervitin actually led us into World War II. The other drug that was made at the same time was by the Bayer Company, and they made a cough medicine that they named heroin. The third one was a different company made a drug out of the coca plant. And this is the one that Sigmund Freud caught on to and said, you know what, this is a catch-all. This is what I've been looking for. It's a stimulant. It'll cure nervous disorders. It'll cure insomnia. It'll cure depression. It'll cure all kinds of different things. And we can use it on everybody. As such, he writes the bug cocaine papers. He wanted every one of his patients to be on it. He had been the first to recommend the use of cocaine in 1885. This recommendation brought serious reproaches down on me because he actually died with a very significant cocaine addiction with massive, massive withdrawals that happened as a result of it. This was picked up thereafter by John Pemberton. John Pemberton is a pharmacist. He's an American who said, you know, I can actually take this and develop from the coca plant a new recipe, and I can mix it with Damanian. I can mix it with some spices, some herbs. Alcohol is important. And I can mix it both with high proof alcohol and wine. Mix that together with a cola nut. This is the first recipe for your Coca-Cola. Okay? And it was used for all nervous disorders. It can be taken for anything and everything. Afterwards, Asa Chamberlain took over and actually started mass marketing and started mass producing. Temperance came in. A lot of the religious groups sat there and said, hey, we don't need the alcohol. We shouldn't have the cocaine. All that needs to go away. But it was creating a euphoric effect for everybody. So how do you replace that euphoric effect without using those things? High dose sugar and high dose caffeine. And it still provides that stimulant, that upper effect. And here we get to the propaganda. 125 years of sharing happiness is their main group right now. But they started out and they said, it creates happiness. And in original times, okay, not original times, but back in the 1700s, when we had the development of the Enlightenment movement, does anybody know what happiness was at that time? Happiness, according to Immanuel Kant, was actually a worthy life. So if you ever ask yourself, why in the Constitution did they say life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? What they were saying was life, liberty, and the pursuit of a worthy life. That's what we want. That's what's going to make people worthwhile. And if you ask them, what do I want out of life? The number of people that would have raised their hands and said happiness, 0. Wasn't even a concept, wasn't a thing. Nobody would have went that way. So they wanted to mix everything that is happy with Coca-Cola. And it started out at the ballparks. People get happy when they're watching a baseball game. People get happy when they are enjoying themselves in this festive time. But remember, at the time, happiness was a very temporary state of mind. It wouldn't be 24/7. It was just during those small, brief takes. What color does Santa Claus wear? Back before 1930, Santa Claus would wear green, brown. Sometimes if you were talking to the Nordic culture, it would be blue. Okay? Once in a while, he would wear red. Okay? But very, very infrequently. These were generally the depictions of Father Christmas or Santa Claus. Coca-Cola actually came in contact with the Christmas imagery, and the first thing to do is change them to red and white to match the Coca-Cola colors. Okay? The second thing to do is fatten them up a little bit, make them jolly, and make them say ho, 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 which sounds like Coke, Coke, Coke. As they got into sponsoring various sporting activities and sporting events, okay, then they would push it even further getting together with the Hamburger Brothers in the 1960s when they made a ready meal and said, why don't you mix your cheeseburgers with some French fries and our Coca-Cola, and we'll call it a Happy Meal. 125 years and we're just getting started, okay? When I work in the emergency room, I see all the time people will always sacrifice their happiness for security and affirmation. They want to know that they're secure, things are okay, and they want to know that they're a good person for doing it. So the first thing that they'll do, if I tell them they've got cancer, when do I start my chemotherapy? That's not a pathway to happiness, okay? And if I ask people too, if your main goal is happiness, why would you get into a random political fight with complete strangers on the internet? That is not a pathway to happiness. Keeping up with this happiness as a main and primary goal is unattainable in a 24/7 situation. It's actually delusional. So how is it that we obtain that happiness at any time? Well, one is a quick fixes. Anybody notice that after the 1950s, 1960s, there was an absolute explosion of drug epidemics? Number one, cocaine, right? Number two, amphetamines. Now we're settling on to fentanyl. And you notice that the mentally ill are ending up back where? And in the prisons where they started out. Obviously, you're scourged by God, so you need to be punished the same way. And we get a full cycle of thinking. The secondary thing is if you're not obtaining it from there, you might be obtaining it from the emergency departments or the medical establishment as a whole. We have come to this idea that anything that is uncomfortable should be banished from our system. Now, pain and anxiety started to be treated like a disease. We need to get rid of them, okay? But pain and anxiety are both messengers, and it's something to pay attention to. To sit there and say I'm in pain means something has changed. Anything that changes in your system will cause an ounce of pain of one way or another. Chronic pain means that something has changed structurally to the point that your body is in constant alarm mode. The secondary thing is anxiety. Anxiety means something is about to change. You have a sense, an apprehension that there's going to be some change or some movement within your body or within your physiology that needs to be addressed. And I can also tell you, for the need of security and affirmation, this is why religion, the Bibles and the Gospels and actually Christ's message itself is the most important. Why? God is always there for you, right? But those things need to be built up inside of you where you have a sense of security, and that affirmation needs to match what your perception is of your achievement. So the way to do that, first and foremost, is achieve, right? You get out and keep moving, keep building, and keep achieving, and your own affirmation will start to build quite a bit, okay? You notice that the participation trophies didn't work out at all. People wanted to give affirmation for just showing up, and that didn't incite people to actually move more, achieve more, or do better. Just gave them another piece of plastic to throw in the closet and be done with it. So that affirmation has to match what you feel, right? So if I come up and say, you're the most beautiful woman in the world, and would you believe that as an affirmation, and say I'm not the most beautiful, not top 5, obviously, you know? But that affirmation has to match with exactly where you are at any given time. When people have started to go over towards this, just pushing towards happiness, notice how things changed, right? So a couple more examples. Somebody goes off to war. Why do they do that, right? It's not happiness. There's nothing happy involved with that. But security, I want to provide security for my country. Affirmation, I'm going to build up in rank. I'm going to receive a medal or an honor of some sort for what I have achieved and what I have done. Secondary thing, people would go to school. And initially, they would go to school with a degree that meant a marketable skill that they could then use for the rest of their life and provide job security. However, and in the same time, they would try to make Dean's List or honor roll. They would try to affirmed their name with a prestigious institution. Look, I went to Harvard. Look, I went to Yale. That way they can provide themselves with that same affirmation that they went to a prestigious school. And now it's changed because we've done the propaganda with happiness. How many people have had kids or grandkids that have gone to college and don't care what major they take? And in fact, it almost seems like there's sexual gratification and alcohol or drug use that is the primary goal, education being a far, far second or last, right? Relationships have changed, where sexual gratification has become the pinnacle, if not the only portion of relationship that a lot of the younger people are having. They don't understand how to make that bond that connects directly with them. So to make that formulary bond in between people in society, they're losing that almost completely. My belief in this is what has been perceived by every society in our history of our culture. And that fact is that we have an energy and everything around us is energy. That energy interconnects us. It interconnects me and you. It connects all of us. Every culture and every civilization has been aware of it. Native Americans have an understanding that there is a spirit and energy in every rock and tree, and they all have names. If I was going to China or in towards Japan, we'd be studying about the Tao. And in the Tao, they would tell me about the Qi, this interconnected energy. If I was in India, they would talk to me about the karma. The karma is an interconnected energy that presupposes justice. Now, there's no proof of justice in our world. Nothing seems fair, which means that the pure justice comes from God itself. So transcendent to that, we would sit there and say, our understanding of the energy that interconnects all of us is the Holy Spirit, right? And so that interconnected energy provides us a security together because we know that we're housed together in society and then we all benefit each other when we can. So we can build that and develop affirmation because there is an interconnected unit. Now there's two types of energy and there's one formulated law, right? So the formulated law is that energy cannot be created or destroyed. It can only be changed. And there's two types of energy. One is potential energy, and two is kinetic energy. So potential energy is a buildup of what can be. If I set a rock at the top of the hill, it has a lot of potential energy. If I roll the rock down the hill, that potential energy is changed into kinetic. It's actually moving now. If I'm taking a bow and arrow and I pull that bow across, that is a lot of potential energy right there. And when I let it go, that's kinetic as it takes off. My belief and my understanding, just from what I know of the Bible, religion, and what it all teaches us, is what God did was actually create infinite potential energy. That's what it is, infinite potential energy. Then he changed that potential energy into kinetic, made it into physical form, developed, built, okay? Then in his likeness and image, what does that mean? Well, he created a species that through free will can continue to convert potential energy into kinetic. It's riddled all through the Bible, and you hear this messaging, don't hide your light behind a bushel. Let it shine, let it grow. Reap more than what you sow. Go out and plant, develop, and actually build further and more. Go forth, be fruitful and multiply. Isn't having a child the biggest form of changing potential energy into kinetic? That's a life form that was just potential that has now become kinetic. If you want to judge for yourself, are my decisions good? Are my decisions not so good? One, don't worry about whether they bring you happiness or not, okay? Because if as a fundamental determination it's bringing you happiness, I guarantee you, it's bringing the opposite to a lot of the people around you. The second thing is, am I building potential energy into kinetic? If you're going around talking and gossiping about somebody, you're bringing down that person's kinetic energy. You're stopping them from movement. Murder itself obviously would be the biggest sin because it's destroying that kinetic energy. Okay, so who can tell me how or what way we use to develop the most kinetic energy out of potential? And it comes in one word. What was it?
Love.
Love. That was it. She nailed it. Okay? Love itself. Go out, love your God with your whole heart, your whole mind, your whole soul. You build more of that energy. You want to interconnect with other people. Love your neighbor as yourself. So you can determine in every step that you make and every decision that you take. Okay? Am I building kinetic energy out of potential? And if the answer to that is yes, almost every time, I guarantee you're going down the right path. The opposite of depression is not happiness. It's not a euphoria. It's not elation. That's why a lot of comedians are comedians, because of the depression that they have, that they're trying to counteract with that. And they find what they find as a resolution in other things than just a comedy itself. The opposite of depression is purpose. Okay, so if you can tell yourself as many jokes as you want, you can try to be as happy as you want, you can drink, you can take cocaine if you want, that will not get you out of bed, I promise. But that purpose is what gets you out there and develops what you need to do. So now you have people like Robin Williams, and this is a tragic case, okay, but he suffered from depression his whole life that he tried to counteract with comedy. And he did it, but what was he doing? He was providing purpose. And he formulated his whole career through USO and trying to give back to the troops, trying to do all those kind of things. That's where he built his career. And he found purpose, and then when he made the limelight, he was actually able to find purpose by helping other people. And when he developed frontal lobe dementia, was the first time that he felt the absolute loss of that purpose, and ended up killing himself not only quickly but very violently. You know, and those are the tragic cases because he lost what was super important for him, and there was no happiness in the world that was going to derive that for him. So if you're concerned about being alone, down, or those kind of things, I would say that you need to develop purpose, not happiness. And if you develop that purpose, it can be with your hobbies, it can be with your activities, what you build, develop, or even contribute. You know, if you're coming to church on a Sunday and you contribute or you know, do things to help or build, or whatever that might be, will be very individual to you. But if you develop purpose more so than happiness, you're going to be on a much better plane.